started, I want you to know that the keg will be here any minute.
Good morning. My name is Peggy Seidel. I'm the president of the Friends of the Montana Historical Society, and we would all like to thank you for spending some time with us this morning. I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Brian Shovers. Brian is retired from the Montana Historical Society Research Center as the library manager 3 years ago. He began his career at Montana Historical Society in the fall of 1993 as a reference historian. Mr. Shovers launched his career in history during his 10-year tenure in Butte, where he studied mining history and served as president of the Butte Historical Society. He is the president of the Montana chapter of the Society for Industrial Archaeology and has written a number of articles for the Montana Historical Society magazine of Western history on a variety of topics. He is currently working on a book about the history of the timber industry in Montana and is an active member of the Last Chance Audubon. Mr. Shovers began brewing his own beer in Berkeley in 1972 and continues his practice today. Please welcome Brian Shovers. Thank you.
Thanks, Peggy. I thought I'd begin by thanking Humanities Montana, who gave the Historical Society a $8,700 grant for us to go out and collect 20 oral history interviews, and also to pay someone to transcribe all those interviews, and they're all going to be posted online at some point. And I'd also like to thank the Montana Historical Society for choosing me to do this job. I did 14 oral history interviews on the microbrewery industry. It's the best job I ever had. Every brewery I went to, the owner insisted that I take a six-pack to go. And they paid me to do this. So I want to briefly talk about the origins of my love for beer. I was born and raised in Racine, Wisconsin, which is about 25 miles south of Milwaukee. And as you probably know, Milwaukee for years and years was one of the leading brewing cities in the United States, really. And my whole career with drinking beer began at the young age of 16. In Racine, the city, there was a 21-year-old drinking age, but out in the county there were townships that served beer at 18. There were beer bars. And so a friend of mine, who later became the head of the AFL-CIO in Racine, was making fake IDs. And so I think the statute of limitations is probably passed on that, in case this goes out to a larger audience. But in any case, we used to hang out at these beer bars out in the county. And as Peggy mentioned, I started brewing beer when I was in Berkeley in 1972. And at that time, home brewing in the United States was illegal. And the only place I could get any malt extract was at the grocery store. It was Pabst Blue Ribbon malt extract, and it was the foulest beer you've ever tasted. But it was cheap. And so I have to give credit. One of my heroes is Jimmy Carter. In 1978, Carter legalized home brewing in the United States. According to the law, you were able to brew 200 gallons a year. Each person or family could do that. I've never actually reached that number. Okay. So, I just want to give you a little bit of background on the importance of the craft beer industry in the United States. Nationwide in 1981, there were only 82 breweries. In 2017, there are over 5,300 breweries. The beer giants like Miller's, Coors, and Anheuser-Busch still hold 90% of the national market. And consolidation of their breweries has led to an increase, a 6% increase in prices of beer at the grocery stores. Craft breweries make up only 11% of the beer market. And over time, prior to Prohibition, there were 19 licensed breweries in Montana. And I got this information recently from Steve Lozar, who, if you ever want to know anything about the history of breweries in Montana, you need to talk to Steve. He's got a little brewery museum up in Polson, and he's planning to write a book. He's been doing research here at the Society for years, gathering information about the history of breweries in Montana. Over time, Steve told me there's been 197 breweries in Montana. I mean, very small little towns in the old days, everybody had their own brewery. And over the years, Butte has had as many as 39 different breweries. In Montana today, there are over 75 breweries. 7 more are expected to open this year. 1,400 employees. Craft beer is attractive to tourists, and 2 to 3 jobs are created for each direct job in the brewing industry. Montana is the largest producer of malting barley in the nation. We have over 630,000 acres of malting barley grown in Montana. And the largest malting facility in North America is located in Great Falls. It's owned by Malt Europe, and it's just a huge complex. And I know that the Blackfoot and the Lewis and Clark get a lot of their malting barley from Great Falls. Butte is talking about producing a malting facility just for craft breweries, and that's in the works. Okay. Whoops. So, the first craft breweries established by a close-knit group of microbreweries, and the 2 earliest breweries in Montana were Kessler in Helena and Bayern in Missoula, and both opened their doors at a cost of less than $150,000, employing used equipment built initially in dairy operations. Todd Daniels, an electrical engineer and graduate of MSU, joined with 2 other recent MSU grads to purchase a small brewing facility in Helena for $100,000 from Intermountain Labs of Wyoming. And it was located adjacent to the Northern Pacific Rail Yard down there in the 6th Ward, and that building is still standing today. The new brewery utilized the Kessler name, familiar to the community for beer making, from the 1860s until Prohibition in 1919, and then again after the repeal into the 1950s. They experienced cash flow problems from the onset. They had to purchase an entire semi-truck of bottles, for example, which cost them, $10,000 up front, and half a truckload of grain, which would have been $5,000 up front. And the payment from the taverns was always, where they delivered the beer to, was always forthcoming. So they actually went out of business by the year 2000. On August 6, 1987, Bayern opened its doors at a cost of $150,000 in Missoula, in the old Northern Pacific Depot. Jim Lueders, who's pictured here, was a U of M student, and he joined forces with Daniel Carey and Jürgen Noller and a fellow by the name of Reinhardt. Both Noller and Reinhardt were experienced brewers from Bavaria who had been trained in the industry in Bavaria. Bayern is another word for Bavaria, actually. The Bayern group organized the first Greater Montana Brewers Cup in 1989 in Caras Park, inviting craft brewers from California, Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. Bayern introduced Missoula beer drinkers to a wide variety of beer flavors and types, which continues to this day. Another very different brewery took shape in Missoula during the early 1990s called Big Sky. Big Sky Brewing. It was the brainchild of Bjorn Nabozney, Brad Robinson, and Neil Leathers, all recent college grads and home brewers. And I might mention here that every brewery owner that I mentioned, or that I interviewed, actually got their start as home brewers. They purchased brewing equipment from a bankrupt Portland brewery for $300,000, but only after Bjorn, a recent graduate of the UM Business School, spent 6 months drafting a business plan and visiting established breweries in Seattle like Red Hook. Here's a picture of Bjorn. So Bjorn early on recognized that quality, consistency, and distribution were the two most vexing problems facing craft breweries. Bjorn spent months courting local tavern owners and distributors. When visiting rural Montana bars, Bjorn talked with owners about everything other than beer, and only after gaining their friendship broached the subject of his forthcoming beer, which finally took the unusual moniker of Moose Drool, a name and artistic creation of his mother, who dabbled in art. And this original drawing or painting is in the lobby there of the brewery in Missoula. By the time they tapped their first keg in 1993, Bjorn had recruited the two top distributors in Montana, Zip Beverage and Fun Beverage, and had been assured a tap in 65 bars in the Missoula area. And as you'll see as I go along, distribution is a major issue for all the craft breweries. Max Pigman, who's pictured here, started brewing at the Sleeping Giant, which was located underneath the brew house in Helena. And he just very recently invested $3 million in a much enlarged and automated brewing facility, which is located down along the railroad tracks here in Helena. And he distributes his beer throughout Montana. In 1996, Todd Scott moved to Montana from North Tahoe, where he began his career as a brewmaster, and with advice from Jürgen Noller at the Bayern, began to pursue his dream of opening a craft brewery. In 2001, with $80,000 and 6 months of hard work, he transformed an old warehouse on the north side of Bozeman into the Bozeman Brewing Company, where they launched Bozeman Select Amber. Today, the brewery employs 19 people and distributes their 6,000 barrels of beer to stores in Billings, Missoula, Helena, and Butte. For the first 5 years, Scott was the only employee and did not have a tasting room. Montana brewery aficionado Steve Lozar helped Scott design his beer label using historic designs found at Lozar's Brewery Museum in Polson, which if you ever get a chance, it's worth a trip to Polson. You need to contact Steve ahead of time. It's not generally open to the public, but it's located above his screen printing shop there right on the main drag in Polson. And he's got just the most incredible collection of old beer bottles, beer cans, beer labels, all kinds of memorabilia related to brewing in Montana. And the back bar and the bar itself come out of his grandfather's tavern, which was located in East Helena. It was called Lozar's, actually. Several years ago, Scott applied for and received a grant to place solar collectors on the brewery rooftop. And here's Scott with his solar array. An instrument-critical dispensing beer at brew pubs and taverns is manufactured in Helena by McDantim's which moved to Helena in 1995 from Southern California. The device that blends CO2 and nitro was designed and patented by Dan Fallon. This is Dan Fallon's father, an aerospace engineer. And after his death, Dan moved the business to a shop above the Parrot in Helena, Montana. Their first year, they only sold 16 units. Today, they have sold over 100,000 units worldwide. I mean, they are one of the few producers of this device in the world, actually. They built a new manufacturing facility along the frontage road east of Helena 5 years ago and currently employ 19 people. By the mid-1990s, the other dozen or so craft breweries discovered the major impediment to their success in Montana's antiquated laws related to distribution and retail sales. The Montana legislature crafted laws after the repeal of Prohibition intended to better control the consumption of alcohol, when in fact they constituted an enormous challenge to a fledgling brewery industry. The law set up a quota system for liquor licenses and a franchise act that granted distributors enormous power over those producing the product they sold. Today, a liquor license in Missoula could cost anywhere between $750,000 and $1 million. This made tavern owners across the state wary of any competition from brewers themselves. Montana law prohibited brewers from selling their product in a pub on the premises, and once a brewer signed a contract with a distributor, he lost all power to negotiate contracts with others. By 1995, Montana craft brewers, organized as the Montana Brewers Association, sought to change these restrictive laws. However, they misjudged the power of the distributors, tavern owners, and their lobbyists. After 2 unsuccessful legislative sessions, Todd Daniels decided to befriend Mark Staples, the chief lobbyist for the Montana Taverns Owners Association. In 1998, Daniels met Staples regularly for a beer at the Rialto Bar in downtown Helena for a friendly beer. After months of this effort, Daniels and Staples mapped out a legislative strategy and a bar napkin and recruited Helena Legislator Hal Harper to implement the plan. So I should say here that Hal talked about how he got involved, and he was encouraged by his father, George Harper, who was a minister at St. Paul's Methodist Church here in Helena. And George was always very much against gambling. And a lot of the local bars by this time had become havens for gambling machines and large screen TVs and such. And the whole notion of neighbors and friends getting together in a bar to talk politics or just socialize had kind of disappeared. And so Hal was inspired by his father, George, to go to bat for this bill as a legislator. Harper recruited Jay Stovall, who had ties to both the distributors and tavern owners, to bring House Bill 442 forward. Compromises within House Bill 442 secured its support from both the distributors and tavern owners, and it finally permitted microbreweries to sell up to 48 ounces of beer between noon and 8 p.m. If the brewery produced less than 10,000 barrels annually. This new law promoted the creation of craft breweries across Montana. Today, almost 2 decades later, you will find a microbrewery in almost every town of any size, even in places as small as Libby, Stevensville, and Webo. The battle over production and distribution continues. Both the distributors and the tavern owners continue to challenge the rights of breweries to sell their own product, even though since the beginning, both accrue more profit from a barrel of beer than the maker. Early on, the brewer received $60 from the distributor for a barrel of beer that cost him $30 to produce, while the distributor sold that barrel to the bar owner for $120, and the bar owner turned around and sold that same barrel to customers for $360. Both the distributor and tavern owner accrued a much higher rate of return than the producer. Jim Lueders, who opened his organic Wildwood brewery in Stevensville in 2013, complained about current efforts to distribute his beer. His efforts to expand distribution of his beer have fallen on deaf ears, and his annual participation in the Garden City Brew Fest has been denied by the organizers last year, even though he recently won an award for the best beer in Montana. He struggles for shelf space in grocery stores with ever-expanding competition from other micros. The 2017 Montana Legislature just passed a bill to allow craft breweries to produce up to 60,000 barrels while still selling their beer on premises. This is great news for Big Sky, who just passed 50,000 barrels a year. But antiquated laws are still hampering full economic development of the industry. Craft breweries and pubs have become a new gathering place for Montanans, especially with the decline of the neighborhood tavern as a place to talk and socialize with the advent of gambling and sports television. For thousands of years, humans have gathered in pubs to socialize. Beer is the place where, beer is a social lubricant, regardless of the culture. The brew pub represents a neighborhood hangout and a place where parents can even bring their children. It is a place to taste a wide variety of beers without a need to get drunk. Tourists often seek out the brew pub in towns they travel to to sample their wares and compare them. I think that the craft beer movement has been one of the more positive developments that has occurred nationwide in decades. And so that's all I have to say. Thank you. So I'd be happy to answer any questions people have. Yes?
I noticed a lot of the breweries that you mentioned were located themselves by the train tracks. Is that just coincidence, or was that for distribution purposes?
You know, I'm not really sure, but I would guess that it might have some